The first time my family erased me. It happened on live television. I didn't know that was what it was at first. I thought it was a mistake, a miscommunication, something that would be corrected once someone realized I was missing. But the camera light was already on. The anchor was already smiling, and my name was already gone. Before I go any further, pause for a second. If you've ever been sidelined by the very people who taught you to speak, like, comment, or subscribe, if this kind of story resonates with you, not because it's dramatic, because it's familiar. Now let me tell you how it started. My name is Hannah Doyle. I was 31 years old at the time, a senior investigative reporter at a regional news network based in St. Louis, Missouri. I covered municipal corruption, wrongful convictions, zoning fraud. Stories that made powerful people uncomfortable. I was good at my job. Not loud about it, not flashy, just thorough. I had broken 4 major investigations in 5 years. 2 had led to resignations. 1 had triggered a federal probe. My work had won a regional Emmy, though my mother never mentioned it. She preferred stories that kept the family name clean. My mother, Elaine Doyle, liked things clean. My father, Thomas Doyle, liked things quiet. And my younger brother, Mark Doyle, liked things easy. I learned early that in our family, I was neither. The event that started everything was supposed to be simple. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary. A Christmas-adjacent celebration, scheduled for December 19th, held at a historic ballroom downtown. Formal attire, speeches, a short segment arranged with the local news, celebrating longtime community couples. My producer, Greg Mallory, had assigned a junior reporter to cover it. Not me. Conflict of interest. I planned to attend as a daughter, not a journalist. That mattered later. The room was packed with relatives I hadn't seen in years. Aunts who hugged too tightly, cousins who asked what I was working on, then glanced away when I answered honestly. The band played old standards. My mother floated from table to table, radiant, in control. My father stood near the bar, nodding, listening, letting her shine. Mark arrived late, as usual, with his wife Jenna Doyle, whose smile never reached her eyes. My mother greeted them like royalty, kiss on both cheeks, hand lingering on Mark's arm. When I approached, she smiled politely. "Hannah," she said, like she was greeting a colleague, not a daughter. That should have been enough warning. Dinner passed. Toasts followed. Stories from the past were told, selectively. My mother talked about sacrifice. My father talked about loyalty. Mark talked about how lucky we were to grow up in such a stable home. No one mentioned the years I worked 2 jobs to pay my own tuition, or the time I slept in my car for 3 weeks after college because I refused to move back home under my mother's rules. Then came the moment I didn't expect. My mother took the stage again, microphone in hand. "There's one more thing," Elaine Doyle said, smiling toward the camera crew. "Something Thomas and I want to share with everyone tonight." I felt a tightening in my chest. "We've decided to downsize," she continued. "And as part of that process, we've made some important decisions about the future of our family home. The house, the one my grandmother had left behind. The one my mother had always referred to as legacy. We're so proud," she said, turning toward Mark, "to pass the house on to our son Mark, who's building such a beautiful life with Jenna." Applause filled the room. The camera panned. I wasn't in the frame. My mother didn't look at me. My father clapped. Mark stood, visibly surprised, then pleased. I stayed seated. No one said my name. No explanation, no acknowledgement, just omission. Later, when the broadcast aired that night, the segment showed my parents, my brother, his wife, the house, a perfect story, a clean transfer, a happy ending. I was edited out entirely. I watched it alone in my apartment, still in my dress, shoes kicked off, makeup smudged from hours of smiling too hard. I rewound it twice. Then again, there was no mistake. The mini hook came when my phone buzzed, a text from my mother. "Isn't this wonderful news? We'll talk later." Later never meant what it sounded like. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. I reviewed documents, returned calls, edited a segment on a city council kickback scheme. At 11:42 a.m., Greg Mallory called me into his office. "Hannah," he said carefully, "we got a call." "From who?" I asked. "Someone identifying themselves as a family member," he replied. expressing concern about a potential conflict of interest related to a story you're developing. My pulse stayed steady. What story? I asked. He slid a folder across the desk. The investigation I'd been working on for 6 months. A real estate development tied to a shell company. One of the board members shared a last name with my mother. Doyle. I looked up. They said you might be too close, Greg added. That was the second erasure. Not public, not loud, strategic. And as I sat there, staring at my own work being quietly questioned, one thought settled in my mind, cold and clear. This wasn't about a house. This was about control. And whatever my family had just started, they hadn't realized one thing. I wasn't just their daughter. I was a journalist. And I had spent my entire career exposing people who thought they could rewrite the truth. They were about to learn what that cost. The conflict review froze my investigation without anyone saying the word frozen. That was how it worked. No accusations, no formal reprimand, just a pause that stretched long enough to suffocate momentum. Greg Mallory avoided my eyes for the rest of the day. When I passed his office, he was suddenly on calls. When I emailed legal for clarification, I received a polite response, thanking me for my professionalism and assuring me the matter was routine. Routine is what people call it when they want you to stop asking questions. I went home that night and opened my laptop, not to work, but to think. My family didn't panic easily. Elaine Doyle never moved without calculating the angles. If she had gone public with the house announcement, if she had contacted my workplace indirectly, then this wasn't impulsive. This was containment. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house without calling first. It sat on a tree-lined street in Webster Groves, brick and white trim, the kind of place people described as solid. My grandmother's rose bushes still bloomed along the fence. Elaine had kept them meticulously, even after Grandma Ruth Doyle passed. Legacy, she called it. My mother opened the door with a look of mild irritation, quickly replaced by a smile. "Hannah," she said, "you should have called." "I didn't know I needed permission," I replied. She stepped aside anyway. My father, Thomas Doyle, sat at the kitchen table reading the paper like it was any other Tuesday. He looked up, nodded once. "Morning," he said. "Mark and Jenna weren't there. That mattered." "I want to understand something," I said, standing instead of sitting. "Why did you announce the house like that?" Elaine poured herself coffee slowly. "Like what?" "Like I don't exist," she sighed as if I were exhausting her. "Hannah, this isn't about you." "It's exactly about me," I replied. "Grandma left that house to both of us." Elaine didn't deny it. Instead, she said, "Mark needs stability." There it was. The phrase she'd used my entire life. "What about me?" I asked. She turned, cup in hand. "You chose a different path." Thomas cleared his throat. "Your mother and I discussed this at length." "Without me," I said. "You're independent," Elaine replied. "You don't need family assets." I nodded slowly. "So you punished me for surviving without you." "That's not fair," Thomas said quietly. "Neither is this," I replied. Elaine set her cup down with a sharp click. "We didn't want complications." That word again. Complications. "Because of my job," I said. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked toward my father, then back to me. "You ask questions," she said. "You don't let things go." I felt something settle in my chest. "You called my workplace," I said. She stiffened. "Just slightly." "I was protecting this family," she replied. "By undermining me," I said. "By suggesting I can't be trusted." "You're too close," she snapped. "You can't see when lines blur." I looked at her. Really looked. "You raised me to see lines," I said. "You just didn't expect me to notice when you crossed them." The silence that followed was thick. Thomas folded his paper. "This doesn't need to be dramatic." "It already is," I replied. I left without saying goodbye. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. "Mark." I almost didn't answer. "Hannah," he said, voice low. "Mom says you're upset." "That's one word for it," I replied. "She didn't mean it like that," he said quickly. "You know how she is." "Yes," I said. "I do." There was a pause. "You don't really want the house," he said. "That's not the point," I replied. "Well," he continued, "Jenna and I are planning kids. It makes sense." "So I'm excess," I said. He laughed nervously. "You're being dramatic." That word again. "Did you know she called my job?" I asked. Silence. "Mark," I said. "She was worried," he said finally, "about you digging into things that could hurt the family." I closed my eyes. "So you knew," I said. "She was just being careful," he replied. Careful, protective, necessary. All the words people use to justify betrayal when it's wrapped in concern. That night, I received an email from legal. The review would take several weeks. In the meantime, I was advised not to pursue related leads. The investigation wasn't even about my family. It was about a development firm using shell companies to launder municipal funds. But one name overlapped: Doyle Holdings, LLC. I searched it myself. Registered 2 years ago. Managed by a trustee. Mailing address tied to my mother's accountant. My stomach dropped. The mini-hook came when I realized something worse. The tip that had led me to the investigation in the first place had come from an anonymous source, someone inside the deal. And now my family was trying to shut it down. The next day at work, a junior producer named Lila Perez approached my desk quietly. "Be careful," she whispered. "About what?" I asked. She glanced around. "People are saying you're compromised." I nodded. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old reporting notebook, the one I used before editors, before producers, before rules that could be bent by the right phone call. I started mapping connections. Doyle Holdings, the development firm, a city zoning board member, a campaign donor. It wasn't illegal. It was worse. It was hidden. And my family wasn't just trying to protect their image. They were protecting something that could collapse if it came into the light. By midnight, I had a working theory. By 2 a.m., I had proof. And by the time the sun rose, one thing was clear. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a story, and it was bigger than me. But telling it would cost me something. My job, my reputation, the last illusion that my family would ever choose me over themselves. I closed my notebook and sat back. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. And my family had just crossed into my territory. They thought they were silencing me. What they'd actually done was give me a reason to speak. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not Greg, not legal, not even Lila, who had warned me quietly and then pretended nothing had happened. I'd learned the hard way that information only stays safe when you decide exactly where it lives. For now, it lived with me. I requested vacation time the next morning. 2 days. Mental health, I wrote. HR approved it within minutes. Too quickly. Like they were relieved to see me step back. That told me everything. I drove across the river into Illinois, rented a cheap motel room off Route 3, and spread my notes across the bed. Paper still mattered when you didn't want a digital trail. Dates, addresses, LLC registrations, zoning changes that passed unanimously with no discussion. And threaded through all of it, quiet and persistent, was Doyle Holdings, LLC. My mother's accountant, Peter Walsh, appeared repeatedly. Same mailing address, same registered agent, and a pattern of donations to local campaigns that aligned perfectly with zoning approvals. Nothing flashy, nothing illegal on its face, just influence. The kind that only works if no one asks why. The mini-hook came when I noticed a line item buried in a disclosure form. A consulting fee paid to an individual named R. Doyle. Not Mark, not Thomas. Ruth Doyle, my grandmother. My stomach tightened. Ruth Doyle had died 18 months earlier. She had been sharp until the end, stubborn, observant, never fooled by my mother's performances. She'd once told me, quietly, that Elaine treated money like leverage, not security. I thought it was bitterness. I was wrong. I pulled Ruth's probate file. Public record. Quiet. Clean. Almost too clean. Her estate had been listed as modest. Savings. Personal property. The house, which Elaine claimed had been transferred fully to Mark by family agreement. But the consulting fees told a different story. Ruth Doyle had been paid regularly by Doyle Holdings, LLC, in the year before her death. Small amounts. Just enough to stay under scrutiny. Just enough to suggest she knew something, or was being compensated to stay quiet. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about my mother undermining me. This went back years. That afternoon, my father called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice sounded tired, strained. "Hannah," Thomas Doyle said, "your mother's worried. She thinks you're making this bigger than it needs to be." I deleted it. By evening, I had built a timeline that made my hands feel steady again. Doyle Holdings formed 2 years ago. Ruth Doyle begins receiving consulting fees shortly after. Zoning approvals follow. Development accelerates. Donations flow. Elaine Doyle distances the family publicly from the company, while quietly protecting it privately. And then I start asking questions. The house announcement, the call to my workplace, the conflict review, containment. I wasn't paranoid. I was late. The next day, I reached out to someone I trusted implicitly. Daniel Reyes. He was a freelance investigative reporter based in Chicago. Mid-40s, careful, stubborn, and allergic to family pressure. We'd worked together once on a wrongful eviction story. He'd kept his mouth shut when it mattered. I called him from a payphone. Old habit. "Hannah Doyle," he said when he answered. "I was wondering when you'd call." That gave me pause. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You're not the only one looking at Doyle Holdings," he replied. "I've been circling it for months." My pulse quickened. "What did you find?" I asked. "Enough to know someone powerful doesn't want it looked at," he said. "And enough to know it's tied to family." I didn't correct him. "Can we meet?" I asked. "Already booked," he said. "Tomorrow, noon. St. Clair Square, food court, neutral ground." When we met, Daniel didn't waste time. "They're using legacy names as cover," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Old money optics, community goodwill. People stop asking questions." I flipped through his notes. They matched mine. "You know they went after my job," I said. He nodded. "That's what they do when they can't discredit the facts." I leaned back. "If I publish, I'm done." "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not. But my family." He held up a hand. "Your family already chose." That landed harder than I expected. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, I wasn't ready to publish. Not yet. I needed leverage. Back in St. Louis, I returned to work like nothing had changed. I attended meetings. I smiled. I let the conflict review drag on. Elaine Doyle called again. This time, I answered. "Hannah," she said, her voice soft. "We're worried about you." "About me?" I replied. "Or about what I know?" A pause. "You're imagining connections," she said. "You've always done that." "Then you shouldn't be afraid of them being examined," I replied. Her voice sharpened. "You don't understand the damage you could do." "To whom?" I asked. She hung up. That night, Mark showed up at my apartment, unannounced. He stood in the doorway, hands shoved in his pockets, avoiding my eyes. "Mom's spiraling," he said. "She always does when control slips," I replied. "She says you're threatening the family," he continued. I stepped aside and let him in. "Sit," I said. He didn't. "What do you want from us?" he asked. I looked at my brother, the one who'd always been protected, shielded, given the benefit of the doubt. "I want you to tell me the truth," I said. He swallowed. "About Grandma," I added. His face changed. "Just a little." "She knew," he said quietly. "About the company, about the money." "And?" I asked. "She didn't agree with it," he replied. "But Mom convinced her it was harmless." "And the payments?" I asked. Mark looked away. "They told her it was consulting," he said. "But it was really to keep her quiet." There it was. I nodded slowly. "And when she died," I said, "Mom consolidated everything." Mark didn't deny it. "She said it was for stability," he murmured. "Stability for who?" I asked. He didn't answer. The mini hook came when he said, "She's going to ruin you before she lets this come out." I met his gaze. "No," I said. "She's already tried." He left without another word. I locked the door and leaned against it. Heart steady, mind clear. I knew what came next. If I stayed quiet, they would keep pressing. Slowly, relentlessly, until I broke or disappeared. If I spoke, I would lose my job, my family, the last illusion of safety. But I would keep something else, my name. And as I opened my notebook and began outlining the story, one thought anchored me. They had spent years building a structure designed to protect themselves. They never considered what would happen if the person they tried to silence knew exactly how to expose it. This was no longer just about betrayal. It was about publication. And once the truth was printed, there would be no editing me out. The first thing I lost was access. Not formally, Not with a meeting or a letter, just a password that stopped working. I noticed it at 6:18 a.m., sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, coffee untouched. My newsroom login rejected me twice, then locked me out completely. No error explanation, just a message telling me to contact IT. I didn't. I already knew what this was. By 8:05, Greg Mallory emailed, asking me to stop by his office when convenient. The phrase meant now. He didn't look up when I walked in. His desk was unusually neat, like he'd prepared for something he didn't want to enjoy. "Hannah," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "This conflict review has escalated." "Escalated how?" I asked. He slid a document across the desk. "Administrative leave. Paid. Indefinite. Pending outcome." "They're concerned about journalistic integrity," he said carefully. "Perception." "Whose perception?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Did legal recommend this?" I pressed. "Yes," he said. "And others." "Others." I nodded slowly. "You know this isn't about ethics." Greg exhaled. "I know you're good at what you do." "That's not what I asked," I said. He looked away. That was my answer. By noon, my press credentials were disabled, my voicemail access revoked, my ongoing investigation reassigned temporarily to another team. My name was still on the staff page, but I wasn't in the building anymore. The mini hook came when my phone buzzed as I was packing up my desk. A text from my mother. "You see what happens when you push too hard?" I stared at the screen, then typed back one sentence. "I see exactly what happens when people are afraid." I didn't send it, not yet. Outside, the city felt louder than usual. Car horns, footsteps, life moving without any awareness that mine had just shifted. I drove straight to Daniel Reyes's apartment in Chicago. No notice, no warning. Just showed up with a box of notebooks and a look that told him not to ask small questions. "Administrative leave?" he said, after I explained. "Yes, they're isolating you," he replied. "Classic. They think I'll fold," I said. "They always do," he replied. "That's why they lose." For 2 days, we worked in silence, cross-checking, verifying, calling sources from burner phones, pulling archived zoning minutes no one had looked at in years. And then we found it. The event, the thing that tied everything together. 3 years earlier, the city had quietly rezoned a strip of riverfront property previously designated as protected land. No press conference, no public hearing, just a line-item vote passed at 9:12 p.m. on a Thursday. The North Line Renewal Partners was partially funded by Doyle Holdings, LLC, and the chair of the zoning board at the time was a man named Kenneth Larkin. Kenneth Larkin was also the godfather of my brother Mark's first child. That wasn't illegal. It was worse. It was personal. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "This isn't corruption in the way people expect." "No," I said. "It's influence disguised as family loyalty." We mapped the connections on the wall with tape and index cards. Names, dates, relationships, donations. Everything led back to Elaine Doyle's quiet hand. The house wasn't a gift. It was a payoff. Mark had been rewarded for obedience, for silence, for staying inside the narrative. I had been punished for refusing it. That night, my father called again. This time, I answered. "Hannah," Thomas Doyle said, "you need to stop this." "Stop what?" I asked. "You're hurting your mother," he replied. I smiled faintly. "She's hurting herself." "You don't understand the consequences," he said. "I understand them better than you think," I replied. "You raised me to." Silence stretched. "We can fix this," he said finally. Privately. "How?" I asked. "We can make arrangements," he said. "The house, money, a statement." There it was, the offer. "Say it clearly," I said. He hesitated. "We take care of you. You walk away." I closed my eyes. "You taught me not to trade truth for comfort," I said. "I just don't think you realized I'd apply that lesson to you." His voice hardened. "If you publish, you won't have a career." "I already don't," I replied. He hung up. The next morning, my mother showed up in Chicago. She stood outside Daniel's apartment building, coat immaculate, posture rigid, like she'd arrived to negotiate, not reconcile. I met her on the sidewalk. "We're not going upstairs," I said. "Hannah," Elaine Doyle said, her voice trembling just enough to sound human. You're destroying us. No, I replied. I'm reporting. You're my daughter, she snapped. You don't do this to family. I looked at her. You did it first, I said. Her face hardened. If this comes out, people will talk. Yes, I replied. That's how journalism works. You think you're immune? She asked. You think this won't follow you? I know it will, I said. And I'm okay with that. She stepped closer. You owe us. I didn't move. I owe myself, I said. And Grandma. That name hit her like a slap. She agreed, Elaine said quickly. She was paid to stay quiet, I replied. I know. Her eyes flicked away. That was the last confirmation I needed. I gave you everything, she whispered. You gave me rules, I replied, and punished me when I followed my own. She stood there for a long moment, then straightened. If you do this, she said, you're dead to us. I nodded. You already decided that. She turned and walked away without looking back. Daniel opened the door behind me. You okay? Yes, I said, and meant it. That night, I wrote the first draft. Not emotional, not accusatory, just facts, connections, receipts. By dawn, the story was real. The question wasn't whether it would run, it was where, and how much damage it would do before anyone could stop it. Because once something like this leaves your hands, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the truth, and the truth doesn't care who raised you. The hardest part wasn't deciding to publish. It was deciding where my loyalty actually ended. Daniel Reyes had contacts everywhere, but contacts weren't the same as protection. Once a story like this went live, it would trigger lawyers, public relations teams, and quiet pressure applied in places I couldn't see. You can't run this through your network, Daniel said, standing by the wall of taped index cards. They'll spike it before it hits daylight. I know, I replied. And if you hand it to a national outlet, they'll sanitize it, he added. Turn it into a trend piece. Remove the names. Protect the donors. I nodded. I'd seen that happen too many times. What about an independent nonprofit newsroom? I asked. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. I was hoping you'd say that. He pulled up a list on his laptop. Midwest Accountability Project, based in Madison, funded by public grants, no advertising clients, no local political entanglements. They publish slow, he said, but when they publish, it sticks. I stared at the screen. Slow meant vulnerable, but it also meant thorough. That night, I emailed the editor-in-chief, a woman named Rebecca Sloan. I didn't pitch. I disclosed my name, my conflict, my family. Then I attached the evidence. I slept 3 hours. Rebecca replied at 6:47 a.m. We need to talk. Today. By noon, we were on a secure video call. Rebecca Sloan had sharp eyes and the kind of stillness that came from long exposure to bad actors. You understand what this costs you, she said. Yes, I replied. And you're prepared to be named, she continued. Yes, she nodded once. Then we'll do this properly. For the next 10 days, my life became a sealed room. Verification calls, secondary sourcing, third-party confirmation. Every claim stress tested until it either held or broke. Nothing broke. In fact, more came in. A former zoning board staffer named Alicia Kent agreed to speak on background. She described envelopes passed during holiday parties, consulting contracts that appeared overnight. Pressure applied softly, then harder. Everyone knew, Alicia said, but no one wanted to be first. A retired accountant confirmed the structure of Doyle Holdings. Shell layers, trust buffers, perfectly legal, perfectly hidden. Rebecca Sloan insisted on restraint. No speculation, she said. No motive statements. We let the pattern speak. I respected that. During that time, my administrative leave became a separation. HR called. Polite, regretful, budget constraints, reorganization. No wrongdoing found, but no position available at this time. I thanked them. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I made a list. Rent, savings, timeline. I could last 8 months without income. 10 if I was careful. That was enough. My mother tried again. Not directly. My Aunt Carol Doyle, my father's sister, called late one night. Hannah, she said softly, Elaine is beside herself. I'm sure she is, I replied. She says you've misunderstood everything, Carol continued. That you're hurting people who love you. I'm reporting facts, I said. If that hurts, it's not my doing. She raised you, Carol said. She raised me to see, I replied. This is what that looks like. Silence. I wish you'd chosen differently, Carol said. So do I replied. But not for the same reasons. 2 days before publication, Rebecca called. We're greenlit, she said. Headlines locked. Legal cleared. Drop is Friday at 9 a.m. Central. My stomach stayed calm. That's when the calls will start, she added. I know, I said. The night before, Daniel and I took everything off the wall. We packed the notes away. Shredded what didn't need to exist anymore. Once published, evidence lives elsewhere. I went back to St. Louis, alone. I wanted to be home when it hit. Friday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone face down. 9 a.m. The headline went live. It didn't mention my name in the title. It didn't need to. By 9:07, my phone started vibrating. Unknown numbers. Missed calls. Voicemails piling up without being heard. By 9:15, my mother texted. What have you done? I didn't reply. By 9:30, the mayor's office issued a statement. By 10 o'clock, the zoning board announced an internal review. By noon, Doyle Holdings LLC's website went offline. The story spread quietly at first, then faster. Not viral, credible. That afternoon, Greg Mallory emailed me. I just read it. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. At 4:12 p.m., Mark called. I answered. They're tearing us apart, he said. His voice sounded small, lost. No, I replied. They're examining. You didn't have to do this, he said. Yes, I replied. I did. You're not my sister anymore, he snapped. I closed my eyes. I know, I said. You chose that before today. He hung up. That evening, Rebecca Sloan called again. Other outlets are picking it up, she said. Carefully. Good, I replied. And one more thing, she added. A source just confirmed the house transfer was contingent on continued silence. I exhaled slowly. So it was payment, I said. Yes, she replied. When I hung up, I stood at the window and watched the city lights come on. I felt tired. Not guilty. Not triumphant. Just finished with the pretending. The story was out. The truth was public. And whatever happened next, it wouldn't be decided behind closed doors anymore. But I knew my family well enough to understand one thing. They wouldn't accept exposure quietly. They would strike back. And the next move wouldn't be subtle. The backlash didn't explode. It tightened. By Saturday morning, the story had been republished by 3 regional outlets and 1 national nonprofit newsroom. Not sensationalized, not softened. Just reprinted with careful attribution and links to primary documents. That was worse for my family than outrage. It meant permanence. The first response from Elaine Doyle came through her attorney. A cease and desist letter. 12 pages. Dense, confident, predictable. It accused me of defamation, breach of familial duty, and intentional interference with business relations. It demanded retraction, silence, and damages. Daniel read it once and laughed. They always do this, he said. It's theater. Rebecca Sloan's legal team responded within hours. No retraction. No apology. Invitation to litigate. That invitation never became a lawsuit because lawsuits require discovery, and discovery requires truth. By Monday, the city announced a formal ethics inquiry into the rezoning vote. Kenneth Larkin resigned for personal reasons. Northline Renewal Partners suspended development pending review. Doyle Holdings LLC dissolved quietly. No announcement, just a filing. That was when my father called. Not yelling, not threatening, begging. Hannah, Thomas Doyle said, voice breaking in a way I'd never heard before. You've made your point. I didn't make a point, I replied. I reported. You don't understand what this is doing, he said. I understand exactly, I replied. That's why I did it. Elaine can't leave the house, he continued. People stare. That's what happens when secrets end, I said. A long silence followed. You always wanted justice, he said finally. I just didn't think you'd turn it on us. I didn't turn anything, I replied. I lifted it. He hung up without saying goodbye. The mini-hook came the next morning. A voicemail from an unknown number. Hannah Doyle, this is Special Agent Marcus Klein with the Missouri Attorney General's office. We'd like to speak with you regarding an ongoing inquiry. I didn't call back immediately. I made coffee. I sat down. I breathed. Then I returned the call. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday, downtown, Federal Building. Agent Klein was professional, neutral, prepared. "We're not investigating you," he said early on. "But your reporting uncovered information relevant to a broader pattern." He slid a file across the table. "Other names, other developments, same structure." "This wasn't isolated," he said. "Your family's company was part of a larger network." I nodded. "They didn't invent it. They participated." "Yes," he agreed. "And participation has consequences." When I left the building, my phone buzzed. A text from my Aunt Carol. "Your mother is unwell. This stress is too much." I stared at the message, then deleted it. I didn't owe anyone reassurance anymore. By Thursday, my former network issued a statement praising investigative journalism and reaffirming its commitment to ethics. My name wasn't mentioned. Neither was my termination. That silence said enough. Friday evening, Daniel called. "You should see this," he said. He sent me a link. A photo taken outside my parents' house. Elaine Doyle stepping into a car, head down, scarf pulled tight. The caption speculated about her role in the inquiry. "She always wanted control of the narrative," Daniel said. "Now she doesn't have one." I closed the link. That night, I dreamed of my grandmother. Ruth Doyle stood in the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, looking at me with the same steady expression she always had. "You finally told it," she said. I woke up calm. Saturday morning, Mark showed up at my door. Not angry, empty. "They're asking questions," he said. "About the house, about the money." "Yes," I replied. "They think I knew," he continued. I met his eyes. "Did you?" I asked. He swallowed. "Enough." I nodded. "They're talking about clawing things back," he said. "Assets, transfers." "That happens," I replied. "You don't care," he said bitterly. "I care," I said. "I just won't lie anymore." He stood there, searching my face for something he used to find. "You're not coming back," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm moving forward." He left without another word. That evening, I received an email from Rebecca Sloan. "We're considering a follow-up piece. Broader context, structural corruption. Would you be willing to consult?" I smiled faintly. "Yes," I replied, "as a journalist, not a daughter, not a sister. A journalist, the thing they had tried hardest to erase, the thing that had survived anyway." And as the city settled into another quiet weekend, I understood something clearly. The revenge wasn't in watching them fall. It was in refusing to disappear when they tried to erase me. And that refusal had just begun to ripple outward, far beyond my family, far beyond me. The truth was moving now, and nothing they did next could stop it. The fallout moved faster once the authorities got involved. Not loudly, not with sirens or cameras, just envelopes, requests, subpoenas that arrived without warning and asked very specific questions. By Monday, 2 city council aides had resigned. By Tuesday, the ethics inquiry expanded into a formal investigation. By Wednesday, the phrase isolated incident quietly disappeared from official statements. Patterns don't like to be called patterns. They prefer darkness. I spent most of that week in my apartment, laptop open, phone charging, waiting for something I couldn't quite name. Not fear, anticipation. Rebecca Sloan looped me into background calls. I wasn't quoted. I wasn't visible. I was a source with a memory, a map, and no reason to protect anyone anymore. That mattered. The mini-hook came when she said, almost casually, "There's pressure from above to limit scope." "From where?" I asked. She hesitated. "State donors? Business associations? Old money?" I nodded. "They always show up late." "They're arguing this could damage public trust," she continued. "It already did," I replied. "They just don't want to admit who damaged it." The next move came from my family. Not through lawyers this time, but through ritual. Sunday dinner. My Aunt Carol Doyle called again. Same tone, soft, careful. "Your father would like to see you," she said. "Just dinner, no arguments." I almost laughed. "Where?" I asked. "At the house," she replied. The house, the one that had started all of this. "I'll come," I said, "but I won't stay long." When I arrived, the street was quiet. No reporters, no marked cars. Just normalcy, pretending nothing had happened. My mother didn't answer the door. My father did. Thomas Doyle looked older than he had a week earlier. not just tired, smaller. "Hannah," he said, "thank you for coming." We sat at the table where I'd done homework as a child. Same chairs, same placement. Elaine's seat was empty. "She's resting," Thomas said. I didn't ask. Mark arrived late, as usual. No Jenna. No smile. Dinner passed with forced politeness. Small talk. Weather. Silence padded with routine. Finally, my father set his fork down. "They're talking about charges," he said quietly. I nodded. "That's how investigations work." "You could help," he said. I waited. "You could say you were mistaken," he continued, "that things were misinterpreted." "There are documents," I replied. "Recordings. Votes." He rubbed his face. "You always were stubborn." "No," I said. "I'm consistent." The mini hook arrived when Mark spoke. "They're asking about Grandma," he said. "About the payments." I looked at him. "Yes," I replied. "They think Mom manipulated her," he continued. "Did she?" I asked. He didn't answer. Thomas cleared his throat. "Elaine did what she thought was necessary." "For who?" I asked. "For the family," he replied. I leaned back in my chair. "You don't get to decide what family means alone," I said. "Not when you silence everyone else." Thomas's voice dropped. "If you don't help us, we lose everything." I met his eyes steadily. "You lost me first," I said. That was the moment he understood there would be no undoing this. Elaine appeared then, standing in the doorway, pale, rigid. "You enjoy this," she said. "No," I replied. "I ended it." She stepped forward. "You could still stop it." "I won't," I said. She stared at me, eyes searching for guilt. She didn't find it. "Then you are no daughter of mine," she said. I stood. "I stopped being that the night you erased me," I replied. I left without waiting for a response. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Cleaner. That night, my phone buzzed with a notification. The Attorney General's office had issued a press release. Formal charges pending against multiple parties connected to zoning manipulation and unlawful influence. No names yet, but they were coming. I sat on my couch, lights off, city glowing through the window. I thought about the girl I'd been. The one who tried harder, explained herself, believed fairness would come if she waited. That girl was gone. In her place was someone who understood something essential. Justice doesn't arrive because you deserve it. It arrives because you refuse to stop insisting on it. And once you do, the people who benefited from your silence will call you cruel for breaking it. That doesn't make them right. It makes them exposed. But the reckoning was no longer private. It was moving toward daylight, and it would not stop for anyone's comfort. By the time the names were released, the city was already bracing. The press conference was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 10 a.m. Missouri Attorney General's seal centered behind the podium. I didn't attend. I watched the live stream from my apartment, volume low, notebook open, out of habit. Special Agent Marcus Klein stood to the side, expression unreadable. The Attorney General spoke carefully. Pattern. Abuse of influence. Breach of public trust. Then, the names came. Kenneth Larkin. 2 former zoning commissioners. A senior consultant at Northline Renewal Partners. And finally, Elaine Doyle. Not charged yet. Identified as a person of interest. My mother's name echoed through the room like a dropped plate. I didn't react. I just wrote it down. The mini hook came 10 minutes later, when my phone began to vibrate without stopping. Unknown numbers. Reporters. Old colleagues. A voicemail from a producer I hadn't heard from in years, asking if I was available to comment. I silenced the phone. This wasn't my moment to speak. By noon, the house was surrounded, not by police, by cameras. Neighbors stood at the edges of their lawns, pretending to water plants that didn't need it. The quiet street where I'd grown up became a backdrop for speculation. Daniel texted me a photo. Elaine Doyle, head down, stepping through the garage door. Reporters shouting questions she didn't answer. She hated that. Not the questions. The lack of control. Rebecca Sloan called shortly after. "They're asking for a statement from you," she said. "Not about the investigation. About your family." "No," I replied. "Good," she said. "That's the right answer." The story didn't need my voice anymore. It had its own momentum. That afternoon, my former network aired a panel discussion about journalistic ethics. My investigation was referenced, anonymously. A senior anchor praised the importance of independence, while carefully avoiding any mention of how they'd handled me. I watched for exactly 2 minutes. Then I turned it off. The first real crack came from Mark. He called at 7:43 p.m., voice tight, breath shallow. "They're saying Mom could be charged," he said. "Yes," I replied. "They asked me to testify," he continued. "About the house, about the payments." I waited. "I don't know what to do," he said. I closed my eyes. "You know exactly what to do," I replied. "You're just afraid of what it costs." Silence. "They'll hate me," he said. "They already used you," I replied. "There's a difference." He hung up. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. No dreams, no rehearsed conversations, just rest. The next morning, a letter arrived, hand-delivered, from Elaine's attorney. Not a threat this time, a request. Elaine Doyle wished to meet privately, without counsel present. I stared at the envelope for a long time. Then I called Daniel. "She wants to see me," I said. He didn't hesitate. "Do you want to?" "Yes," I replied, "but not for the reason she thinks." We met 2 days later at a public park along the river. Midday, families nearby. No privacy to weaponize. Elaine sat on a bench, sunglasses on, hands folded. She looked smaller, not fragile, reduced. "You look tired," she said when I approached. "So do you," I replied. She took off the sunglasses. "They're painting me as a villain," she said. "They're examining facts," I replied. "You could clarify things," she said. "You know my intentions." "I know your methods," I replied. The mini hook came when she said, "If you loved me, you wouldn't let this happen." I sat down. "If you loved me," I said, "you wouldn't have tried to erase me." She flinched. "This wasn't meant to hurt you," she said. "It did," I replied. "And you kept going." She looked away toward the river. "I did what I had to," she said. "No," I replied. "You did what you wanted." Silence stretched. "They're asking about your grandmother," she said quietly. "They think I manipulated her." "You did," I replied. Her jaw tightened. She agreed. "She was paid," I said. "That's not agreement. That's pressure." She turned back to me, eyes sharp again. "You think you're better than me," she said. "No," I replied. "I think I'm done protecting you." Her shoulders sagged slightly. "Is this revenge?" she asked. I shook my head. "This is journalism," I said, "and boundaries." She stood abruptly. "You've ruined this family," she said. I stood too. "You built it on silence," I replied. "I just stopped keeping it." She walked away without another word. I didn't follow. That evening, the Attorney General's office announced indictments were imminent. Elaine Doyle's attorney declined to comment. Mark texted me once. I told them everything. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, because he had finally chosen truth without needing my permission. As the city settled into another uneasy night, I sat at my desk and reviewed the outline for the follow-up piece. Not about my family, about the system, because what they had done wasn't unique. It was common. And that was the most dangerous part. The story was no longer personal. It was structural. And once that shift happens, there's no going back to quiet dinners and selective memory. The reckoning had moved past the family. It was rewriting the rules they thought only applied to others. And it wasn't finished yet. The indictment came on a Monday. Not dramatic, not televised. Just a document filed at 8:03 a.m. that rippled outward through court dockets, inboxes, and the quiet panic of people who had assumed they would never be named. Elaine Doyle was charged with conspiracy to commit honest services fraud and obstruction related to a public zoning process. My mother's name appeared in black and white, followed by a case number. I read it once. Then I closed the file. I didn't feel relief, or anger, or triumph. I felt distance, the kind that comes when something is no longer inside your body, no longer pressing on your lungs. The mini hook arrived later that morning when Rebecca Sloan called. "They're pushing for a plea," she said. "Early negotiations." "That fast?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "Someone's cooperating." I didn't have to ask who. Mark's testimony had done what it always does when truth finally surfaces. It cracked the structure from the inside. By noon, the city council scheduled an emergency session to address zoning oversight reforms. The mayor's office released a statement emphasizing accountability and transparency. Words people use when they are late to the truth, but still want credit for acknowledging it. My phone stayed silent. No calls from family, No messages from my father. That silence told me everything I needed to know. In the afternoon, I walked past the newsroom for the first time since my leave became permanent. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. Through the glass, I saw the familiar rhythm. Producers hunched over screens, reporters pacing with phones pressed to their ears. The machinery of urgency, always moving. For years, I'd believed that place defined me. Now I understood. It never had. I received an email that evening from a national investigative nonprofit. We followed your reporting closely. Would you be open to a conversation? I stared at the screen for a long moment. Yes, I typed, but not tonight. That night, I went to my parents' house. Not to confront anyone, not to retrieve anything, just to see it once more, without the weight of expectation. The street was quiet. The lights inside were off. The house looked smaller without my mother's presence animating it, without her constant need to curate and perform. I sat in my car and watched the porch light flicker on, then off again, like a habit that hadn't caught up to reality yet. This place had never been mine. That was the truth I'd avoided for years, and accepting it felt like release. The mini-hook came 2 days later when my father called. His voice was flat, stripped of authority. "She's going to plead," Thomas Doyle said. "Yes," I replied. "They want me to testify too," he continued. "About the finances." I waited. "I don't know if I can," he said. I closed my eyes. "You can," I replied. "You just don't want to face what comes after." He exhaled shakily. "She'll never forgive me." "She never forgave anyone," I replied. "She only controlled." Silence stretched. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends on what you choose," I replied. He hung up without saying goodbye. That weekend, the follow-up piece went live. Not about my family. About the network of influence that allowed people like my mother to operate unchecked for years. The zoning loopholes, the donor pressure, the way silence was rewarded. My name appeared as a contributing journalist. That mattered. The reaction was measured. Serious, policy-focused, no spectacle. That was the point. On Sunday evening, I received one final message from my mother. 3 lines. No greeting. "I never meant to hurt you. You didn't have to do this. I hope one day you understand." I read it once. Then I deleted it. Understanding doesn't come from explanations offered too late. It comes from patterns observed over time, and I had understood her perfectly. By the end of the week, Elaine Doyle formally entered a plea agreement. Reduced charges in exchange for full cooperation. No trial. No public testimony beyond what was required. The house was listed for sale. The proceeds frozen, pending asset review. Legacy dismantled, quietly. That night, I sat at my desk and opened a blank document. Not a story, a plan. Because while this chapter was ending, something else was beginning. I no longer needed to fight my family to be seen. I had something better. A voice that didn't ask permission. A career that wasn't contingent on silence. And a line I would never cross again. The story had taken everything I thought defined me. In return, it gave me something cleaner. Agency. And as I closed my laptop and turned out the light, I knew one thing with certainty. The hardest part was over. What came next would be built on choice, not reaction. And that made all the difference. The courtroom smelled like old wood and recycled air. I arrived early. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see the room empty. No murmurs, no whispers, no audience projecting meaning onto faces they didn't understand. Elaine Doyle's plea hearing was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. on a gray Thursday in late March. The kind of morning that didn't pretend anything good or bad was about to happen. Just inevitable. I sat in the back row. Not hidden, not conspicuous. Present. My mother entered through a side door with her attorney. No makeup, hair pulled back. She didn't scan the room. She didn't look for me. That hurt less than I expected. Thomas Doyle followed a few minutes later. He sat alone, shoulders slumped, hands folded like he was afraid of what they might do if left free. Mark wasn't there. He'd already given his statement, signed it, walked away. The judge read the charges slowly, clearly, like each word deserved to be understood. Conspiracy, obstruction, abuse of public trust. Elaine's attorney spoke next. Mitigating factors, community history, cooperation. When my mother stood to enter her plea, her voice was steady. Guilty. No explanation. No justification. Just the word. I didn't react. I watched the way her jaw tightened afterward. The way her hands clenched for a moment before relaxing again. Control slipping. Then recalibrated. The judge accepted the plea. Sentencing would come later. It was over in 27 minutes. When the hearing ended, people stood, gathered belongings, resumed breathing like they'd been holding it in. I stayed seated until the room emptied. The mini hook came when I stood to leave and saw Thomas watching me. Not accusing, not angry, just lost. He approached slowly, as if unsure whether he was allowed to cross the distance. "Hannah," he said quietly. I nodded once. "She did what she thought was best," he said. I met his eyes. "She did what she wanted," I replied. "There's a difference." He swallowed. I should have stopped her. "Yes," I said. He waited for something else. Forgiveness, comfort, permission. I didn't give it. "I hope you take responsibility," I said. "For yourself, not for her." He nodded, eyes wet, and stepped back. I walked out into the cold air without looking back. That afternoon, I met Rebecca Sloan for coffee, not as a source, not as a subject, as a colleague. "You were right to stay quiet," she said. "Your presence mattered more than any quote." "I didn't go for closure," I replied. "I went for accuracy." She smiled faintly. "That's very you." She slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer. A year-long investigative fellowship, national scope, editorial independence, institutional backing without interference. "You'd be writing," she said, "but also mentoring, shaping how these stories get told." I read the terms carefully. Not the salary first. The protections, editorial firewall, legal support, conflict disclosures handled transparently. This wasn't a rescue. It was recognition. "I'll accept," I said. Rebecca nodded. "Good. We need people who won't blink." The days that followed were strangely quiet. No calls from family. No reporters at my door. No sudden reversals. Just logistics, paperwork, transitions, packing up the last of my things from the newsroom, with a borrowed badge and a nod from security that carried no judgment. At home, I boxed up items I'd kept out of habit rather than attachment. Old photos, letters I'd never reread, things that belonged to a version of me that survived by accommodating. I kept one notebook, the first one I'd ever used as a reporter. Everything else went. The mini hook arrived one evening when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "This is Alicia Kent. We spoke during the investigation. I just wanted to say thank you." I came forward after reading the follow-up. So did two others. I stared at the message. "You didn't owe me that," I typed back. "I know," she replied. "That's why it matters." That night, I dreamed again. Not of my grandmother this time. Of myself, younger, standing outside a locked door, pressing my ear to the wood, trying to understand why my voice didn't sound welcome on the other side. In the dream, I stopped knocking. I turned away. I woke up before dawn, calm. In the weeks before sentencing, speculation filled the gaps left by facts. People debated intent, character, motive. I didn't engage. I focused on the work. The first piece under my fellowship went live in mid-April. Not connected to my family, not local. A story about a rural county using nuisance laws to displace long-term residents without due process. The response was immediate. Not praise, impact, policy review, legal challenge. Lives disrupted, then defended. That was the point. I received one final email from my mother's attorney 2 days before sentencing. Elaine Doyle wished to convey remorse and hoped I would consider a private conversation before the court date. I didn't respond. Remorse, when filtered through counsel and timing, is still a negotiation. I was done negotiating. On the morning of sentencing, I didn't attend. I was on a train, heading east, notebook open, watching towns blur into one another through the window. I thought about how many times I'd been told to be patient, to be understanding, to let things go for the sake of family. What they never explained was who benefited from that patience. It wasn't me. The train slowed as it approached the city. I closed my notebook and leaned back. The story that had defined me for months was finished. The work that would define me next was just beginning. And for the first time in my life, the direction forward wasn't shaped by reaction. It was chosen. That realization settled deeper than relief. It felt like ownership, and it was enough to carry me into whatever came next. Distance has a way of reorganizing memory. By the time sentencing happened, I was 3 states away, sitting in a borrowed office with a window that faced a brick wall and a coffee shop dumpster. Not scenic, not symbolic, just real. I checked the docket once that morning. Elaine Doyle received 18 months, suspended in part, with supervised release and restitution. No prison, no spectacle. Enough consequence to be recorded, not enough to feel satisfying. I closed the tab and went back to work. That choice surprised me. For years, I'd imagined that moment would carry weight, that something inside me would shift when the final number landed. It didn't. The shift had already happened, quietly, long before the judge spoke. The fellowship moved fast. I was embedded with a team that didn't care about my last name, only my sourcing. We worked on deadline without panic, on impact without performance. I spent my days interviewing people who had learned to survive systems that pretended not to see them. They spoke plainly, carefully, like people who had paid for every sentence. I recognized that discipline. The mini hook came when my editor asked, "Do you want to write about families again?" I considered it. "Not yet," I said. "I'm interested in power without a last name." He nodded. "Good. So are we." Weeks passed, then months. I moved apartments. Smaller, quieter, no ghosts. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. I stopped scanning rooms for exits. I stopped explaining myself preemptively. Those habits took time to unlearn. Mark emailed once, just a paragraph. No subject line. "I'm in therapy." I sold the house. I don't know who I am without Mom directing everything. I'm trying to learn. I read it twice, then archived it, not to punish him, to protect myself from becoming his next compass. My father never reached out again. That absence felt clean. One evening, after a long day in the field, I sat on the floor of my apartment, eating takeout and watching the news without sound. A familiar anchor spoke about ethics reforms in municipalities I'd never visited. The chyron referenced an investigation I recognized. The ripple had traveled. That was the reward, not revenge. Continuity. The work mattered beyond me. The work would outlast me. The mini hook arrived unexpectedly, through a knock on my door. A neighbor, mid-40s, tired eyes. "I saw your name on a piece last week," she said. "My sister's dealing with something similar. Different state, same pattern." She hesitated, then added, "Do you think it ever really ends?" I thought about my mother. The control, the certainty, the belief that love justified anything. "It ends when you stop carrying it alone," I said. "Not before." She nodded, thanked me, left. I sat back down on the floor and let that answer echo. I hadn't said it for her. I'd said it for myself. The last family obligation I released was silence. Not the loud kind, the careful kind. The kind that pretends peace is the same as harmony. I had learned the difference. As summer edged toward fall, I received an invitation to speak at a journalism conference. A panel on ethics, disclosure, and the cost of independence. I almost declined. Then I accepted. On the day of the talk, I stood at the podium and spoke without mentioning my family. I spoke about systems that reward proximity and punish questions, about the way institutions flinch when truth comes from inside their own walls. The audience listened. Some nodded. Some didn't. Afterward, a young reporter approached me, voice low. "They told me to drop a story," she said, "because it involved someone important." "What are you going to do?" I asked. She hesitated. Then, "I don't know yet." I smiled faintly. "That's okay," I said. "Just don't let them decide for you." That night, back in my apartment, I opened my old notebook. Not to write, to read the first page. A question I'd written years earlier, when I was still learning how to see. Who benefits if I stay quiet? I closed the notebook. I didn't need the question anymore. I knew the answer. And I knew my own. It ended with alignment between what I did and who I was willing to be. The final chapter would be quieter, but it would be mine. The end didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a morning where nothing demanded anything from me. I woke up before my alarm, light slipping through the blinds. The city still undecided about the day. For a moment, I lay there, waiting for the familiar tightening in my chest, the reflexive inventory of risks and reactions. It didn't come. That was how I knew something fundamental had changed. I made coffee and drank it slowly, standing by the window. No phone in my hand, no headlines to chase, no family updates to brace for. Just quiet, uninterrupted ownership of my time. Later that morning, I walked to the park near my apartment and sat on a bench with my notebook open on my lap. I wasn't reporting. I wasn't outlining a piece. I was writing for myself. Something I hadn't done in years. I wrote down what I'd lost, not the house, not the inheritance, not the last name's privileges. I wrote that I'd lost the belief that proximity to family meant safety, that obedience would be rewarded, that silence was a form of love. Then I wrote down what I'd gained. Agency, precision, the ability to walk away without apologizing. The list was shorter, but heavier. In the weeks that followed, life settled into something steady. The fellowship ended and turned into a contract. Then another. I traveled. I listened. I reported stories that didn't flatter power and didn't ask permission. People stopped introducing me with context. "This is Hannah Doyle," they said. "Investigative journalist. Not the daughter, not the whistleblower, not the problem, just the work." That mattered more than I'd expected. I never spoke to my mother again. She sent one final letter through her attorney after her probation began. It was carefully worded, regretful without admitting fault, loving without accountability. I didn't respond, not out of spite, out of clarity. My father sent nothing. Mark sent updates occasionally. Therapy, new job, learning boundaries, he said. Learning how to think without asking first. I wished him well silently. That was enough. One afternoon, months later, I found myself back in St. Louis for an unrelated story. After the interview, I drove past my childhood neighborhood without planning to. The house was empty now. A for sale sign stood crooked in the yard. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. The city had changed. Or maybe I had. Either way, the streets felt neutral, no longer charged with memory or expectation. On my way back to the hotel, I passed the old ballroom where my parents' anniversary celebration had taken place. The place where my absence had been edited cleanly out of the frame. I parked across the street and watched couples arrive for a wedding. Laughter, dresses, music leaking out through open doors. Life continuing, unaware. I felt nothing sharp, just distance. That night, in my hotel room, I turned on the television and muted it. Images moved without sound. People speaking without context. Stories flattened into visuals. I thought about how often I'd been told I was too much, too intense, too observant, too unwilling to let things slide. What they meant was this: I didn't disappear easily. I turned the TV off. The next morning, an email waited in my inbox from a reader. She wrote about a Thanksgiving dinner where she'd been dismissed, about a family business that excluded her quietly, about being told she was imagining patterns that later turned out to be real. "I don't want revenge," she wrote. "I just want my life back." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I replied, "You don't need revenge to reclaim yourself. You need boundaries and time. The rest follows." I didn't know if she'd believe me. I only knew it was true. The lesson I carried forward wasn't about punishment or exposure. It was about choosing where I stood when the truth became inconvenient. Family drama taught me that loyalty without consent is just control by another name. Revenge stories taught me something else. The most effective payback isn't destruction, it's withdrawal. Withdrawing your silence, withdrawing your labor, withdrawing your willingness to be edited out so someone else can look clean. I didn't burn anything down. I stepped out of the frame, and when I did, everything that depended on my silence began to shake on its own. If you're still listening, if this story felt uncomfortably familiar, take a moment. Like the video. Subscribe if you want more stories about boundaries, betrayal, and the quiet kind of justice that actually lasts. And if you've ever been told to stay quiet for the sake of family, leave a comment. Not to explain yourself, just to mark that you were here. I'm Hannah Doyle. I didn't win by destroying my family. I won by refusing to disappear for them. And that choice gave me something better than revenge. It gave me my life back.